How powerful was the Roman Emperor? In this video, we'll discuss how powerful the Roman Emperor really was. This video is done in collaboration with another channel here on YouTube called Eastern Roman History. Make sure you check out part 2 on their channel where they cover the power of the emperor during the late empire from Diocletian to Romulus Augustulus. You can find a link to their video in the description of this video. People often mistakenly believe that Julius Caesar was the first emperor, but he was only ever named dictator for life during the Republic. It was his adopted son Octavian, later named Augustus, after winning the civil war against Mark Antony and Cleopatra, that he became Rome's first emperor. Ever since the formation of the Roman Republic in 509 BC and expulsion of the last king of Rome, the title of king, or rex, was a bad word, and they had sworn to never again allow a man to become king in Rome. But with the consent of the Senate, Augustus slowly assumed leadership of the empire, although he did so with traditionally republican powers and titles. Even though Augustus disliked titles, being very aware of what had happened to his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, who almost appeared as monarch towards the end, Augustus was granted the title of Princeps, or the first citizen. A traditional title that had been used throughout the Republican era denoted a Princeps Senatus, the foremost senator. The Senate bestowed more and more powers to Augustus. He had extreme authority over provincial governors, Imperius Maius, and he was granted an extraordinary command of many of the strategic provinces close to the frontiers, which also meant he controlled most of the armies of the empire. Augustus had the authority to call an assembly of the people to enact laws, or tribunica potestas, and with the enormous authority he controlled who could run for office. Later emperors could select who would win, even if there was still a voting system in place. Augustus would later become Pontifex Maximus, the highest religious authority of Rome, a sort of chief priest. As a result of all these grants of power, the emperor formally outranked governors and all other magistrates. And all of these extraordinary grants of power would later be transferred to his successors, beginning with Tiberius. While a new monarchy of sorts had formed, it was veiled with a republican veneer. Let's address the fact that there was no ancient Roman equivalent to the English title of Roman Emperor. The title of emperor is derived from the Latin word imperator, which comes from the Latin verb imperare, meaning to command. It was a title used during the Republic, and it denoted a commander. So the emperor adopted that title to mean commander-in-chief, and it was a title all the emperors held. But the titles that really denoted the emperor was that of Augustus and Princeps. Sometimes modern historians even refer to the empire as the Principate. The title or name of Augustus was granted to Octavian in 27 BC, roughly meaning the elevated or divine one. It became common practice for the emperors to announce a junior partner and a selected successor by granting them the title of Caesar, and once the emperor passed away, the Caesar would become the new Augustus, and to whom the Senate would bestow all the powers of the previous emperor. While the emperor was the main source of all legislation, it often took the form of a senatorial decree. Sensible emperors often attended the Senate meetings and treated the senators with a certain degree of respect. The emperor was supposed to behave well from a point of view of the elite, and if he did not act properly, he could be removed, and there was only one way to do that. The Principate rested on a military foundation, but emperors did their best to keep the military out of politics. But the support of the soldiers was crucial to them. How did they manage to ensure loyalty in ordinary circumstances? The soldiers in the capital, namely the Praetorian Guard, were naturally the most important, and they were paid 3 times as much as legionnaires. It was crucial that the emperor selected loyal commanders of the legions, and you can imagine why, when a new emperor took the throne, especially after a dynasty fell, the loyalty of the commanders and the troops were up in the air. So the first thing a new emperor did was to grant huge donations to the soldiers to secure their loyalty. We can take a look at 2 case studies on this subject. First, with the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty in 68, the Senate proclaimed one of their own, Galba, to the imperial throne. Galba, however, failed to placate the armies. The following year, a civil war broke out between the armies of the empire to put their chosen candidates on the throne, and ultimately the military man, Vespasian, was installed as the next emperor. And secondly, with the fall of the Flavian dynasty in 96, the Senate again proclaimed one of its own, Nerva, to the position of emperor, who lacked all connections to the armies. And his situation proved to be extremely precarious until he announced the adoption of Trajan, again a military strongman in the empire at the time. Keeping the armies loyal became increasingly paramount after the fall of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. During the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the armies for the most part accepted all the emperors based on the virtue of their lineage. Some later emperors were killed because of their lack of military involvement or knowledge, like Alexander Severus. The soldiers thought that he was dominated by his mother and that he had been ineffective as a military leader, and he was killed for it. And with the increased instability of the empire, both internally and externally, in the 3rd century, Emperor Septimus Severus said this of his two sons, Caracalla and Geta, who would be joint heirs: "Don't disagree with each other, give money to the soldiers, and despise everyone else." Ideological foundation of power. The ideological foundation of the emperor can be summed up by these elements: military prestige, his quasi-divine status, and family continuity. The emperor had ever since Augustus enjoyed some religious trappings, such as the office of Pontifex Maximus, and upon the death of an emperor, if the Senate approved, he became, in a loose sense, a god. And even during the emperor's life, he was considered to be more than just human. In the eastern provinces, he was commonly referred to as a god, and throughout the empire, temples were built jointly for Rome and Augustus. And an imperial cult was established, whose responsibility it was to look after the divine spirit of the emperor. While it's very hard to quantify how much the religious position of the emperor contributed to his personal power, it would have, even if subconsciously, influenced ordinary civilians who might have felt some degree of awe. The Imperial Court. The emperor had to rely upon a large, complex network of officials to conduct the business of ruling the empire. We can even speak of a kind of oligarchy. The key members of this court were naturally the emperor's immediate family and favorites, alongside secretaries as well as public office holders such as the Praetorian prefect. The latter official was usually the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, apart from the emperor himself, usually a man from the equestrian rank. And most of the actual work of governing was done by a staff of freedmen and slaves. The most important functions would get formal titles from Claudius onwards. They did everything from taking care of the imperial correspondence to accounts and receiving petitions. There would have been hundreds of freedmen and slaves working for the emperor at any given time. The freedmen in particular could accumulate enormous power and wealth. Pallas and Narcissus are extreme cases, accumulating staggering amounts of wealth and power under Claudius's reign. The Imperial Estates. The wealth of the Roman Empire was primarily based on land, and the largest landowner in the empire was naturally the emperor. Whether from seizure of land from political enemies or through donations from people who wanted to carry favor of the emperor, the Imperial Estates grew, and by the late 2nd century the Imperial Estates held land in almost every province, making the emperor extremely wealthy. And aside from the estates, Egypt was a personal province of the emperor, and aside from Italy, it was the most profitable province of the empire. Conclusion. While the emperor's power was more or less absolute, he could start wars, enact new laws, or build whatever he wanted, there were a number of things that de facto limited what he could do. The decentralized nature of the ancient world meant that enacting any wide-sweeping change or policy in the empire was extremely difficult and would take time. Aside from the fact that there were some softer values such as keeping the Senate placated, with the vestiges of the Republic still remaining, the emperor had to maintain the veneer of the old Republic or risk assassination plots, even though both parties now realized where the true power resided. In Eastern Roman History's video that you can find in the description below, they will talk about how the power dynamics changed from Diocletian onward. Thanks for watching the video.